Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The midday sun hammered at Dusty Rivers as he hauled Silas the Serpent Croft's carcass through the parched earth. The notorious stagecoach robber was a pathetic sight now, a bloodied bundle lashed to Dusty's saddle. For months, Croft had bled the stage lines dry, leaving behind a wake of corpses and ransacked strongboxes. 2 weeks Dusty spent on his trail, weathering blistering heat and navigating treacherous ravines, motivated solely by the reward. No satisfaction, just another task concluded. Redemption Gulch's sheriff's office came into view, the town's moniker a cruel jest considering its lawless nature. The air reeked of stale brew and sweat. Dusty heaved Croft's remains off his mount, the dull thud resounding in the otherwise deserted street. A scattering of faces peered from shadowed doorways, only to vanish as their gazes met Dusty's steely stare. Sheriff Brody, his bulk straining his uniform, waddled out, wiping his brow. "Well, Rivers, color me surprised. You actually bagged him." He scrutinized the corpse, a blend of relief and suspicion in his eyes. "Figured Croft would be your undoing." "He wasn't," Dusty stated, his voice a monotone. He severed the ropes, letting Croft's body drop unceremoniously. "The bounty?" Brody grunted, retreating inside. He reappeared moments later, counting out the currency with thick fingers, roughened by time. The stack was considerable, enough for sustenance and shelter for a few months, sufficient time to bury the images of the departed. "Pleasure doing business," Brody commented, extending the payment. His gaze flickered to the faded wanting notices plastered to the wall, a silent inquiry lingering. Dusty accepted the money, shoving it into his worn vest without a word. He pivoted and strode away, the descending sun stretching his shadow long before him. Redemption Gulch offered him nothing, merely another exchange in a life built on acquisition and delivery. Inside the dimly illuminated saloon, the air vibrated with hazy smoke and the low drone of inebriated voices. Dusty located a secluded table, ordering whiskey from the barkeep, a leathery man with a perpetual frown. He sipped it slowly, observing the other occupants. Miners, gamblers, vagrants, each seeking something in this barren landscape. Wealth, excitement, oblivion. He wasn't so different, he supposed. Except he wasn't searching, he was fleeing. Fleeing the memories that plagued his sleep, the visages of those he had slain, the existences he had extinguished. Each reward was a fleeting distraction, a momentary silencing of the internal cacophony. But the voices invariably returned, amplified. He drained his glass and signaled for another, the fiery liquid a welcome burn. He wasn't intoxicated, not yet, but his thoughts were beginning to soften, the keen edge of his conscience slowly blunting. It was his preferred state. The barkeep placed the fresh drink down, his eyes lingering on Dusty's face. "Heard Croft gave you a run for your money." Dusty merely shrugged. He wasn't worth the effort. "They seldom are," the barkeep said, his tone unexpectedly soft. "Just specters chasing specters." Dusty remained silent, focusing on his drink. The barkeep's words hung in the air, an unwelcome truth. He lingered in the saloon for another hour, drinking and observing, lost in contemplation. The din and the haze dissolved into the background, supplanted by the ghosts of his memory. A young boy, pleading for his father's life. A woman, shrieking as flames consumed her dwelling. Men he had dispatched without pause, without regret. He had convinced himself it was simply business, that he was doing what was necessary to survive. But the excuses were wearing thin. Exiting the saloon, he drew in the frigid night air, attempting to clear his head. The stars blazed, scattered across the vast canvas of the sky like glittering jewels. A wave of loneliness washed over him, a profound ache within his soul. He possessed no kin, no companions, no one who cared whether he lived or died. He was adrift in the world, a hunter pursuing his own shadow. Back in his Spartan room at the boarding house, he kindled a lamp and arrayed the wanted posters on the shaky table. Faces stared back, men and women accused of offenses ranging from minor theft to outright murder. He quickly perused them, seeking his next mark, the next payout. His gaze landed on one poster in particular. A woman, Tessa Langford, accused of robbery and homicide. The reward was handsome, the highest he'd seen in ages. $5,000. He scrutinized her features. She was young, barely 20, with radiant auburn hair and eyes that seemed to smolder with defiance. The poster painted her as dangerous, merciless, a heartless killer. Yet something in her expression suggested something more. There was a fragility there, a trace of melancholy that intrigued him. He grasped the poster, turning it over in his hands. $5,000 could procure a new life, an opportunity to outrun the darkness of his past. He could abandon Redemption Gulch, vanish into the wilderness, begin anew. He could finally silence the echoes. But something restrained him. He couldn't shake the sensation that there was more to Tessa Langford than the accusations suggested. He had witnessed enough falsehood and deception to recognize something amiss. And this felt amiss. He re-examined the details, the charges, the purported evidence. It all seemed too perfect, too convenient. He suspected someone was trying to frame her, to silence her. But why? And what secrets did she harbor? He crushed the poster in his fist, his mind churning. He understood he should take the assignment, collect the reward, and move on. It was his standard procedure. But something about Tessa Langford had burrowed beneath his skin. He couldn't articulate it, but he felt a strange yearning to locate her, to unearth the truth. He unfurled the poster, smoothing out the creases. He recognized it was an error, that he was treading a dangerous path. But he couldn't disregard the nagging feeling in his gut. He had to find her. He reached for his firearm, the familiar heft reassuring in his grasp. He was a hunter, and she was his quarry. But this time, something had shifted. This time, he wasn't solely chasing a bounty. He was pursuing something else, something intangible. Perhaps it was justice, perhaps redemption, maybe simply a way to quell the inner voices. He didn't know, but he was determined to discover it. He extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He knew her whereabouts, or at least her last known location. Deep within the Rocky Mountains, a remote and unforgiving terrain. It promised a lengthy and perilous journey, but he was prepared. He had endured worse. He stepped into the night, the cool air biting at his face. The stars seemed to beckon, guiding him toward his destiny. He couldn't foresee what awaited him in the mountains, but he knew his life was poised for transformation. He was no longer merely a bounty hunter, a cold and detached executor. He was something more. He was a man driven by purpose, a man in pursuit of truth, and he wouldn't rest until he found it, even at the cost of everything. He mounted his horse, the leather protesting beneath him. He spurred the animal onward, fading into the darkness, leaving Redemption Gulch behind. His hunter's code, once immutable, was beginning to splinter, replaced by something nascent, something uncertain, perhaps hopeful. Only time would unveil the answer. The price on her head, the bounty flyer, felt rough beneath his weathered palm, unlike the others. It wasn't the glint of promised gold that propelled him, but a dissonant note struck by Tessa Langford's likeness. Wanted for robbery and homicide, the broadside trumpeted, offering a hefty sum for her capture, alive or deceased. The dead or alive clause usually rolled off him, but fixed to this particular face, it felt like a barb. He located Sheriff Clemens behind a scarred oak desk in the sheriff's office, the man's badge catching what little light managed to seep into the room. Dust spiraled lazily within a solitary sunbeam. Clemens resembled an overstuffed keg, exuding bluffness from every pore. "Mornin', Dusty," he rumbled, barely sparing a glance. "Seein' as Silas is pushing up daisies, figured you were huntin' another payday." Dusty laid the Langford notice on the desk's surface. "Tell me about this." Clemens finally focused, his gaze sharpening. "Tessa Langford claims she's innocent, swears she harmed no one, stole nothing. Pure fabrication. Wealthy father's girl, a recent arrival. Probably imagined rules didn't apply to her." He punctuated the statement with a brown spurt into a waiting receptacle. "Pilfered from the bank, shot the teller. Heartless." "How much did she take?" Dusty inquired, his tone level. "Irrelevant. The quantity is immaterial. She's guilty. Witnesses abound, reputable ones." Clemens swelled with self-importance. She even procured some fancy lawyer from the East, but even he couldn't sway the jury. Now she's absconded. Dusty scrutinized the sheriff's features, seeking a glimpse beyond the pompous facade. He found only smug contentment. Where was her last location? Heading for the Rockies. Naive girl. Won't survive a week in those peaks. Clemens emitted a dry, grating laugh. "Good riddance." Dusty retrieved the poster. "Thanks, Sheriff." He pivoted to depart, Clemens's pronouncements lingering. Naive girl. He wasn't convinced. Something in the charcoal rendering of her eyes spoke of resistance, not culpability. He purchased a fresh map and provisions at the mercantile, the proprietor's gaze a palpable curiosity. Dusty disregarded him, his thoughts already ascending into the jagged spires of the Rocky Mountains. He restocked his saddlebags, confirming the readiness of his Henry rifle and the abundance of cartridges. This was unlike the Silas Croft pursuit. This was a chase cut from different cloth. As the day waned, he rode into the foothills, leaving the parched plains in his wake. The atmosphere cooled, fragrant with pine and dewy earth. The terrain was a gauntlet of granite bluffs, dense woodlands, and spirited brooks. He frequently dismounted, scrutinizing the soil, his vision sweeping for any trace of Tessa Langford. The almost undetectable disruption of the earth, a fractured twig, the delicate outline of a boot heel in a mire. Insignificant details, easily overlooked, yet, to Dusty, they formed a legible script. He discovered her initial encampment just prior to nightfall, nestled within a petite clearing adjacent to a lively stream. The fire was defunct, the embers long ashen. He knelt, examining the ground. She had been meticulous, attempting to conceal her passage, but lacked the expertise of an experienced woodsman. He discovered a cast-off bandage, stained crimson, and a half-devoured apple remnant. She was injured. Dusty navigated the campsite noiselessly, his senses heightened. He detected no indication of her continued presence. He studied the trajectory she had taken, heading further into the highlands, toward a restrictive passage. He remounted his steed, urging it forward. The trail was cooling, but remained discernible. As shadows deepened, he established his own bivouac, a modest, discreet fire that offered minimal illumination. He consumed a meager meal of cured meat and biscuits, his mind working. He revisited his exchange with Sheriff Clemens, searching for discrepancies. He contemplated Tessa Langford's image on the wanted notice, the firmness of her expression, the resolute spark in her gaze. He battled the sensation that something was amiss, that the narrative he had been given was incomplete. He slept uneasily, plagued by recollections of former pursuits, of visages melding into a single, accusing stare. He awoke before sunrise, the air biting. He extinguished the fire, gathered his effects, and resumed his tracking. The course guided him higher into the mountains, the landscape escalating in severity. He traversed slim ledges, forded frozen torrents, and forced his way through tangled thickets of conifers. He encountered additional indications of Tessa's journey: a discarded covering, a splintered limb with a fabric fragment ensnared, and ultimately, a series of pristine footprints in a patch of snowdrift. She was close by. He crested a rise, and there it was, a humble dwelling tucked within a secluded dell below. Smoke lazily spiraled upward. He dismounted, securing his horse behind a copse of trees. He approached the abode warily, his Henry rifle at the ready. He halted at the clearing's edge, listening acutely. The sound of chopping wood reached him, the consistent cadence of an axe biting into timber. He advanced silently toward the structure, his boots muffling in the powdery snow. He peered through a chink in the logs. There she was, Tessa Langford. She was cleaving logs with an axe, her motions powerful and assured. Not a remorseless killer. A woman fighting simply to exist. He lowered his weapon, a strange confluence of relief and unease engulfing him. He had located his quarry, but now that he had, uncertainty took hold. The reward offered for her capture suddenly felt insignificant. The truth, he surmised, was far more valuable. He inhaled deeply and stepped out into the open. Cabin in the Pines sighed secrets as Dusty neared the cabin, each footfall on the brittle forest floor an amplified intrusion in the quietude. A lifetime spent tracking had honed him, his senses humming with alert awareness. Wood smoke, a perfumed lure in the vast emptiness, carried a thread of warning. He felt watched, despite the stillness. Circling the rough-hewn structure, he noted new prints near a haphazard woodpile. His hand found the comforting heft of his revolver. The door, a rough plank secured by a wooden latch, yielded to his forceful kick. Jagged splinters marked his entrance. Inside, the air was dim, illuminated by a weak sun slicing through a grimy window. The mingled scents of resin and something feral, animalistic, hung in the air. Then he saw her. Tessa Langford stood poised, rifle aimed at his chest, a defiant silhouette against the log wall. The cheap paper of the wanted poster hadn't captured the spirit blazing in her stormy eyes. A crimson-soaked bandage circled her left arm. "Dusty Rivers," she stated, her voice a steady rasp that belied her situation. "Took you long enough." Dusty eased his revolver slightly. Tessa Langford, wanted for robbery and murder. "Alleged," she corrected, grip firming on the rifle's stock. "There's a gulf between accusation and truth, Hunter." "Is there?" He stepped deeper, cataloging the scant provisions, the threadbare blanket on the cot, the unfinished wood-pull evidence of hard-scrabble survival. "Lower the rifle, Tessa. Let's not escalate this." "Escalate?" A short, bitter laugh escaped her. My life's a bonfire thanks to your kind. It's my job, her response was venomous. To hound the innocent for coin? To fatten the purses of those who pervert justice? He recoiled, her words striking a painful chord. Just a job, he'd repeated for years. Lately, the faces of the captured haunted his sleep. The law is the law, he recited, the justification ringing hollow. The law? Her eyes blazed anew. That allows a tyrant like Jasper Thorne to chokehold the town? That lets him frame anyone who dares challenge him? Thorne claims you robbed his bank, killed his foreman. He orchestrated it. She spat, her voice unwavering. The foreman was skimming from Thorne. I discovered it. Thorne silenced him and pinned the blame on me. Motive? Dusty inquired, seeds of doubt sprouting. Because I refused his advances. Disgust coloring her tone. He believed he owned me. Thorne doesn't accept no. Dusty scrutinized her features, seeking deception. He saw only raw defiance, pain, and a desperate need to be believed. He'd learned to read faces, and her story resonated with an undeniable truth. Why didn't you stay and fight it? Clear your name? Against Thorne's power? In that town he owns the sheriff, the judge, everything. Flight was all that was left, but I won't remain hidden. What's your plan then? I'm returning, she declared, her eyes hardening. I'll prove my innocence. Expose Thorne. That's suicide, Dusty countered, shaking his head. He'll eliminate you. Perhaps, she conceded, but I refuse to exist like this. Haunted, hunted. I would rather meet death standing than live on my knees. The silence stretched, underscored by the fire's whisper. Dusty lowered his revolver completely. He saw not a killer, but a woman battling for her life, her integrity, for justice itself. Thorne wields considerable influence, he observed, his voice measured. He has tendrils everywhere. I'm aware. He has allies in positions of power. The stakes are high. I'm already living on borrowed time. Dusty moved closer, his gaze unwavering. Then maybe you shouldn't face it alone. Surprise flickered in Tessa's eyes as she lowered her rifle slightly. What are you suggesting? That perhaps, Dusty replied. I've stood on the wrong side of the line for too long. He holstered his revolver. The click reverberated. A statement. A choice. I came to bring you in, Tessa, he continued, his voice roughened by emotion. But maybe I was sent to correct an injustice. He extended his hand, scarred and hardened, towards her. Tell me everything, he urged. Leave nothing out. A seed of doubt, Dusty lowered the rifle, the lingering heat in the barrel a stark reminder of their standoff. He'd anticipated a swift surrender. Most targets, particularly the women, buckled under his steely gaze and the threat of cold iron. Tessa Langford, however, remained unbowed. Despite the crimson stain blooming on her makeshift bandage, her gaze held a brazen challenge. The wind, scented with resin, and the impending wrath of a mountain storm, clawed at their clothes. Going to shoot, Rivers? Her voice, though rough, possessed a surprising steadiness, masking the pain he knew she must endure. A grunt was his only reply as he reholstered the weapon, a more deliberate movement than usual. Her unwavering intensity had unsettled him. I'm a bounty hunter, Miss Langford. Listening rarely factors into the equation. Then you're willfully ignorant, she retorted, auburn strands escaping her braid to dance in the wind's grip. Because you stand ready to condemn an innocent soul for a crime she didn't commit, He circled her, his gaze assessing. Frailer than the posters suggested, her garments spoke of hardship and repair, yet an unquenchable spirit burned within her. The broadsides depicted a ruthless predator, a heartless pilferer. The woman before him defied that image. No cowering, no pleading, just untamed fury and a desperate appeal for belief. Robbery and homicide, Miss Langford. A hefty price on your head. Sheriff Thompson sounded utterly convinced. Thompson is but a puppet on Thorne's string, she snapped back, eyes ablaze. The entire town dances to his tune, fattening themselves on his lies. Dusty crouched, examining the desolate campsite. A dead fire, meager provisions, a half-eaten rabbit. She had been living like a fugitive for weeks. He picked up a delicate carving, a small wooden bird, wings outstretched in perpetual flight. An unlikely possession for a hardened criminal. Thorne, he mused, testing the name. Jasper Thorne, a railroad magnate, rumored to own half the territory. What role does Thorne play in this? A fractional hesitation flickered across her face, and Dusty's instincts sharpened. The first chink in her armor. He desired my attention. I refused. He brooks no denial. He rose, turning the wooden bird in his hand, marveling at the intricate detail of its plumage. A compelling motive, admittedly. You expect me to believe a man of Thorne's stature would frame you for murder simply because you rejected him. Oh, believe what you will, she said, her voice strained. But I swear, Rivers, I killed no one. I stole nothing. Thorne orchestrated this. He needed a fall guy, and I served his purpose. He prodded her small pack with his boot. Where's the stolen fortune, Miss Langford? The notices claim you absconded with a king's ransom. There was no fortune, she cried, her voice rising in pitch. That's what I'm trying to convey. It was all fabricated. Thorne planted evidence, bought perjured testimony. The entire charade was a contrivance. Dusty knelt, unfastening the pack and rifling through its sparse contents. A few blankets, jerky, a well-worn Bible. Nothing indicative of stolen riches. He discovered a small pouch tucked away at the very bottom. He opened it, anticipating jewels or bullion. Instead, he found a collection of smooth, river-tumbled stones. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Stones? They remind me of home, she whispered, her voice losing its stridency. Before Thorne took everything, he recalled Sheriff Thompson's account of the robbery. The sheriff had been resolute. A strongbox overflowing with gold, snatched in broad daylight, witnessed by many. He had even mentioned a distinguishing scar on the perpetrator's left hand. Dusty examined Tessa's hands. Calloused and marked by hardship, yes, but devoid of any recent or peculiar wound. He stood, replacing the pouch in her pack. The wind gained momentum, whipping dust into miniature cyclones. A distant roll of thunder reverberated through the mountains. The storm surged closer. Thompson claims you executed the bank teller in cold blood, Dusty said, his eyes never leaving her face. Said you relished it. Tessa recoiled, a shadow of pain darkening her features. That's a fabrication. I never discharged my weapon. Upon entering the bank, the teller was already deceased. I panicked and fled. That's when Thorne's thugs apprehended me and planted the strongbox. Dusty remembered Thompson's words echoing in his mind. She's a remorseless killer, Rivers. Don't be deceived by those pretty eyes. Yet, staring at Tessa now, he saw no malevolence, no frigidity. Only fear, exhaustion, and an earnest plea for justice. Turning away, He walked towards the edge of the clearing, his mind a battlefield of conflicting thoughts. The evidence was flimsy at best. The sheriff's narrative contained inconsistencies, and something in Tessa's gaze, something authentic, resonated within him. He'd been tracking fugitives for years, honing his skill for detecting falsehoods. But with Tessa Langford, doubt lingered. Halting, with his back to her, the wind buffeted his coat. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall. $5,000, Miss Langford, enough to secure a comfortable existence. Are you going to deliver me into his hands, Rivers? She asked, her voice fragile against the rising wind. He turned to face her, his jaw clenched tight. He could feel the weight of his revolver on his hip, the burden of his past, the gravity of the choice before him. Rain lashed down, plastering her hair to her face, turning the ground into a mire. I don't know, he admitted, the words stark and honest. I honestly don't know. Whispers of Blackwood the deluge had ceased, leaving the air thick and cloying as Dusty rode into redemption, a name that mocked the moral decay festering within. Mud, like a persistent doubt, clung to his horse's hooves. He sought clarity, and this town was the crucible, even if the resulting truth proved bitter. Before the saloon, its doors groaned a somber greeting as he dismounted. Inside, a miasma of stale hops and cheap tobacco hung heavy. A discordant piano melody mirroring the ache in Dusty's soul. He addressed the barkeep, a man sculpted from granite, every line etched by hardship. Whiskey, Dusty managed, his voice raspy. A silver coin landed on the scarred countertop. And some answers? The barkeep pushed a glass towards him, the amber liquid trembling. Answers are a costly commodity, friend. Their worth depends on the question, Dusty countered, his gaze unwavering. Tessa Langford, the stage hold-up, the killing. The barkeep's gaze sharpened, a fleeting shadow apprehension flitting across his features. I've heard whispers. Unsavory business, that. Unsavory enough to condemn a woman, Dusty retorted, swallowing a long draught of whiskey. Tell me what you know. The barkeep began wiping the counter, pointedly avoiding Dusty's eyes. Town gossip says she's guilty. Stole from the stage, murdered a man. That's the sum of it. Dusty closed the distance between them, his voice a low growl. That's the tale you wish to impart. Fear permeates this town. Fear of something or someone. What is it they dread? Silence stretched, punctuated only by the barkeep's sigh, a deflating exhale. Silas Blackwood. He holds this town in his fist. What he demands, manifests, no questions permitted. Blackwood. The name left a vile residue in Dusty's mind. Rumors of underhanded dealings and ruthless aspiration had preceded the man, shrouding him in shadows cast by the railroads. What connection has Blackwood to Tessa Langford? I wouldn't know, the barkeep replied too quickly. And I prefer it that way, merely relaying what filters through the grapevine. He occupied himself with the glassware, the exchange concluded. Dusty knew he'd extract no further information. He drained his glass and returned to the street. The sky, a canvas of bruised violet, threatened rain. He needed someone unafraid to voice their knowledge of Silas Blackwood, a scarce commodity in redemption. The subsequent hours blurred as he meandered through the town, his inquiries met with furtive glances and mumbled excuses. Citizens scattered as if fleeing a plague. A palpable dread blanketed the town, choking any hope of unearthing the truth. Defeated, he nearly conceded when he spotted a boy, no older than 10, whittling wood on the mercantile steps. Dusty approached with deliberate gentleness. "Afternoon, son," he greeted, striving for a friendly tone. "Seen anything out of the ordinary recently?" The boy looked up, his eyes guarded. "Depends on who's asking." "Just a traveler," Dusty responded, "seeking the truth." He knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. "About the stagecoach robbery, about Tessa Langford." Hesitation flickered across the boy's face. He darted a nervous glance around. "Heard things," he murmured, barely audible. "Things best left unsaid." "Such as?" Dusty pressed gently. "Such as it wasn't Miss Langford who held up that stage," the boy whispered. "Heard tell it was Blackwood's crew. They wore masks, but I saw the brand on one of the horses. A B inside a diamond. That's Blackwood's mark." Dusty's pulse quickened. "A witness?" "A precarious one, but a witness nevertheless." "You witnessed this firsthand?" The boy nodded, his eyes brimming with fear. "I was playing, hiding amongst the trees. Saw everything." "Why did you remain silent?" Dusty inquired, his voice tinged with frustration. The boy's lip quivered. "Pa told me to be quiet. Said Blackwood wouldn't take kindly to gossip about his affairs. Said he'd make us disappear." Dusty understood. The fear was justified and bone deep. "Your secret is safe with me," he assured the boy. "But you must understand, Miss Langford may be innocent. She might be in grave danger." The boy stared down at the wood in his hands, his brow furrowed in concern. "What can I do?" "Simply remember what you saw," Dusty instructed. "That is all. Just remember." He rose, his mind already piecing together the fragments. A connection, albeit tenuous, had been established. Silas Blackwood was somehow involved. He had to uncover the how and the why. As he retraced his steps towards his horse, a figure materialized from the alley's gloom. An elderly woman, her face obscured by a ragged shawl, beckoned him closer with a skeletal finger. Dusty paused, approaching with caution. "What is it you want?" The woman's voice rasped like wind through brittle leaves. "I overheard your questions regarding Tessa Langford." "That is correct," Dusty affirmed, his hand instinctively hovering near his revolver. "She is blameless," the woman croaked. "A victim of deception. Blackwood covets her land. The soil is rich in minerals. He will resort to any measures to seize it." "How do you possess this knowledge?" Dusty pressed, his suspicion deepening. "I perceive what others miss," the woman replied, her eyes gleaming in the shadows. "I overhear the things that are not meant to be spoken. Blackwood believes himself untouchable, but truth emerges eventually." She reached beneath her shawl and produced a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "Deliver this to Tessa," she instructed, pressing it into Dusty's hand. "It will offer her protection." Dusty examined the bird, a tremor of unease running through him. Protection from what? The woman simply smiled, a chilling, toothless display. From the encroaching darkness. As swiftly as she had appeared, she melted back into the shadows. Dusty stood motionless, the wooden bird weighty in his palm. The murmurs of Blackwood's influence were amplifying, the conspiracy thickening. He was no longer motivated solely by a bounty. He had stumbled into a conflict he sensed he couldn't afford to lose. He mounted his horse as the rain began anew, washing the dust of redemption from his skin. One certainty resonated within him. His course was now irreversible. He would unearth the truth, even at the cost of his own life. An unlikely alliance, the jail cell radiated a chill that seeped into Dusty's bones, a cold more profound than any tomb. Outside, the lantern's erratic glow splashed macabre figures against the rough-hewn stone. He clutched the aged, leather-bound ledger Mrs. Crabtree had entrusted to him, its pages a devastating account of Silas Blackwood's treachery. He raked calloused fingers through hair perpetually coated in dust, the familiar sensation a gritty anchor against the turmoil within. A bounty hunter, that's all he was, not some virtuous champion. Yet the ledger, compounded by the stark terror etched on young Timmy's face, had fractured the hardened shell around his heart. He swallowed hard, the sound amplified by the cell's confines. "Langford," he called, the name bouncing off the cold stone. Tessa Langford sat rigidly on the edge of the cot, defiance a palpable force. She remained motionless. Dark strands, escaped from her normally meticulous braid, framed a face sculpted of sharp angles and intractable pride. Weariness clung to her like a shroud, but her spirit remained unbroken. "What do you want, Rivers?" she finally asked. "I believe you were set up." He brandished the ledger. "Blackwood's been siphoning profits from the mine for years. When you threatened to expose him, he moved to permanently silence you." Tessa's gaze finally lifted, her eyes, the hue of a brewing squall, narrowed with suspicion. "Why tell me this? You hunt people. Your kind is hardly concerned with justice." "I wasn't, once," Dusty conceded, the words leaving a bitter residue. "Things are different now." He left the reason unsaid, unwilling to confront the specters that dogged his steps, the faces of those he'd hunted, guiltless and otherwise. "Different how?" she challenged, her voice brittle. "Sudden attack of conscience?" "Perhaps," Dusty shrugged. "Or perhaps I object to being a pawn." He nudged the ledger closer to the bars. "Read it." Blackwood staged the stagecoach robbery, hired guns to murder the passengers, and then deftly pinned the blame on you. He coveted your land, specifically the water rights. You were an impediment. Tessa snatched the book, their fingers colliding in a fleeting contact that sent a surprising jolt through him. She devoured the meticulously kept records, her expression shifting from dawning comprehension to incandescent fury. "That snake!" she spat, her voice trembling with repressed rage. "He murdered them. All those innocent souls he did," Dusty affirmed. "And he will again if he's allowed to continue unchecked." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I can help you reclaim your name." Skepticism warred with a nascent glimmer of hope in Tessa's eyes. "Why would you? What do you gain?" "Atonement," Dusty rumbled, the word raw. "Maybe I'm weary of chasing shadows. Maybe I desire to apprehend someone who genuinely deserves it." His gaze locked with hers, unwavering. "But I can't accomplish this alone. I need your assistance." Tessa scrutinized him, her gaze piercing, assessing. His reputation preceded him. He was Dusty Rivers, relentless and unwavering in pursuit. Trusting him was a perilous gamble. After an agonizing silence, she finally asked, "What do you need me to do?" Dusty released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "First, we need to extract you from this place. This town festers in Blackwood's grasp. The law offers no sanctuary. And how do you suggest we achieve that?" A trace of a smile played on Tessa's lips. "I have several notions," Dusty replied, a matching grim smile etching itself onto his face. "But it won't prove easy. Blackwood anticipates our next move. and we'll have eyes on this jail. I fear neither Blackwood nor any fight, Tessa declared, her voice ringing with resolve. Precisely the attitude we require, Dusty affirmed. He sketched out his strategy, a high-stakes play hinging on the element of surprise and a considerable measure of luck. He had acquired a certain expertise in extricating himself from impossible situations over the years and hoped to leverage that experience now. A shared sense of purpose hardened their resolve as they planned. They were an unlikely pair of renegades, their alliance forged in the fires of betrayal and injustice. Their adversary possessed formidable resources and a cruel disposition. But they held something Blackwood could never acquire: the truth. Once we're free, Dusty continued, we must unearth irrefutable proof, evidence that will withstand legal scrutiny and expose Blackwood's true nature. The mine, Tessa stated. He keeps meticulous ledgers there. I've observed him. Then that shall be our destination, Dusty confirmed. But expect heavy security. Blackwood leaves nothing to fate. We shall find a passage, Tessa insisted, her eyes burning with steadfast determination. We must. Dusty nodded. He understood that the path ahead would be fraught with hazards and setbacks. He also knew that retreat was no longer an option. His commitment was absolute, not only to absolving Tessa, but to holding Blackwood accountable for his depravities. It was a long odds wager, a desperate roll of the dice, but for the first time in years, Dusty realized he was fighting for something that transcended mere payment. He fought for vindication, for rectitude, for the chance to finally quiet the voices of his past. He met Tessa's gaze, seeing his own resolve reflected. They were an odd couple, a hunter and hunted, bound by fate and a mutual thirst for justice. Though they faced a formidable opponent, they were not alone. They possessed each other's unwavering support, and that, Dusty mused, might just prove to be enough to carry them through. Ambush at Widow's Creek, the morning air hung thick and heavy, smelling of pine and damp earth as they rode through Widow's Creek. Dusty, leading the mare, scanned the dense foliage on either side of the narrow track. Tessa, perched behind him, held tight, her gaze mirroring his vigilance. The jailbreak had been clean, but Blackwood wouldn't let her go easily. He'd be furious. And fury translated to hired guns. Think they'll come after us this soon? Tessa asked, her voice tight against his back. Blackwood's not one to let grass grow under his feet, Dusty replied, his hand instinctively going to the worn handle of his revolver. He'll want this settled, and settled quick. The creek gurgled to their left, the only sound besides the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves. Dusty felt a prickling on the back of his neck. He reined in the mare, halting her abruptly. "What is it?" Tessa questioned, her grip tightening. "Something's not right." Dusty dismounted, pulling Tessa down with him. Too quiet. He drew his Colt Peacemaker, its blued steel gleaming dully in the dappled sunlight. Tessa, surprisingly, didn't hesitate. She slipped off the mare's back, her movements fluid and practiced, and pulled the rifle from its scabbard. The rifle, a Winchester lever-action, looked almost too big for her frame, but the way she held it, steady and confident, told a different story. A heartbeat later, the ambush erupted. A volley of gunfire ripped through the air, tearing leaves from the trees and kicking up dirt around their feet. Dusty shoved Tessa behind a thick cluster of rocks, dropping to one knee and returning fire. The attackers were positioned on the high ground, concealed amongst the trees and boulders, giving them a clear advantage. "Damn it, they're all over the ridge," Dusty yelled over the gin. Tessa, calm amidst the chaos, sighted down the barrel of her rifle. A puff of smoke blossomed from the trees, followed by the crack of a rifle. She didn't flinch. Her shot rang out a split second later. A strangled cry echoed from the ridge. "Got one," she announced, levering another round into the chamber. Dusty appreciated her coolness under pressure. He'd expected panic, hysteria, but she was holding her own, fighting with a ferocity that belied her delicate features. He fired again, forcing one of the ambushers to duck behind a boulder. "We can't stay here. We're sitting ducks," Dusty shouted, his voice barely audible above the relentless gunfire. "We need to move." "Where to?" Tessa asked, firing another shot. Dusty glanced around, assessing their options. The creek. It was their only chance. "The creek! Follow me!" He grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the water. They scrambled down the bank, slipping and sliding on the loose gravel. The water was icy cold, numbing their feet as they splashed through it. Bullets whizzed past, striking the water with sharp, hissing sounds. They reached the other side, finding meager cover behind a fallen log. Dusty peered over the top, spotting at least 5 men on the ridge, all armed and determined. "They're flanking us," Tessa warned, pointing to 2 figures moving through the trees to their left. Dusty swore under his breath. They were pinned down, outgunned, and surrounded. He needed a distraction, something to buy them time. "Stay here," he ordered, crawling away from the log. "Where are you going?" Tessa hissed. "I have an idea. Cover me." Dusty moved quickly, using the sparse cover to his advantage. He circled around, positioning himself behind a large boulder that offered a degree of concealment. He pulled a handful of cartridges from his belt, loading them into his spare revolver. He took a deep breath, then leaped out from behind the boulder, firing both revolvers in rapid succession. The sudden burst of gunfire caught the ambushers off guard. They turned their attention to him, unleashing a hail of bullets in his direction. Dusty ducked and weaved, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He emptied both revolvers, then tossed them aside. Grabbing his rifle, he fired a few more shots, drawing the enemy further away from Tessa. He glanced back, signaling her to move. She understood immediately. She scrambled out from behind the log, darting through the trees, heading towards a dense thicket of brush. As Dusty turned to follow, he felt a searing pain in his shoulder. He stumbled, dropping his rifle. One of the ambushers, a burly man with a scarred face, emerged from the trees, leveling his rifle at Tessa's retreating figure. "Tessa, get down!" Dusty yelled, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Tessa turned, her eyes widening in terror. She froze, caught in the open. The burly man squeezed the trigger. Without thinking, Dusty lunged forward, throwing himself in front of Tessa. The bullet ripped through his side, knocking the wind out of him. He crumpled to the ground, his vision blurring. He heard Tessa scream his name, followed by the sharp crack of her rifle. The burly man grunted, clutching his chest, and collapsed. Tessa rushed to Dusty's side, kneeling beside him, her face etched with worry. "Dusty! Dusty, are you all right?" He groaned, clutching his side. "I'll live," he managed to croak out. "Just a scratch." Tessa ripped a strip of cloth from her dress, pressing it against the wound. Her hands trembled. "You saved my life," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Why?" Dusty looked up at her, his eyes filled with a newfound understanding. "Maybe," he rasped. "Maybe I'm tired of watching innocent people get hurt." The remaining ambushers, momentarily stunned by the turn of events, regrouped and began to advance. Tessa, her face grim, raised her rifle, ready to fight. "We're not out of this yet," she said, her voice firm. "But now, we fight together." Secrets of the past, the last of Blackwood's crew lay sprawled under the deepening twilight, the sharp tang of spent gunpowder, a stark contrast to the sweet scent of pine. Dusty knelt, snagging his hat, now ventilated with a fresh bullet hole. He settled it back on his head, a reflexive action more than a practical one. His gaze drifted to Tessa, who leaned against a twisted juniper, her breathing ragged. Dirt smudged her skin. Sweat plastered strands to her face. But beneath the grime, a steely resolve burned that both intrigued and gave him pause. "We need to move," he rasped, his voice gravelly. "They'll be back, and they won't be so few." Tessa straightened, pushing off the tree. "Where to, then?" "Somewhere beyond Blackwood's long reach. Somewhere. Untouched." He pictured a forgotten cabin, tucked high in the peaks, a haven he hadn't seen in ages, a place for quiet contemplation and, hopefully, a way to grasp the gravity of the situation he'd stumbled into. They rode through the night, a crescent moon, a sliver in the dark expanse. The world became a blur of motion, punctuated only by the steady cadence of the horses' hooves and the heavy blanket of silence strung between them. Finally, as dawn ignited the eastern sky with vibrant hues, they arrived. The cabin stood in disrepair, the timber bleached gray by sun and wind, yet the roof appeared sound, and the isolation was almost a tangible thing. Dusty swung down, easing out the stiffness in his limbs. "It's a far cry from paradise, but it's cover." He worked the lock, the hinges screaming their agony, and pushed the door inward. The interior smelled of stale dust and echoes of the past. Tessa followed, her gaze sweeping the single room. A hearth, a battered table with two mismatched chairs, a rolled-up bed in the corner. Austere. Functional. "It'll serve." Dusty coaxed a fire to life, the flames snapping and hissing, banishing the lingering chill. He offered Tessa hardtack and jerky. She ate in silence, eyes fixed on the flickering light. "So," Dusty began, shattering the quiet, "care to enlighten me? What makes Blackwood want you 6 feet under so badly?" Tessa sighed, a sound burdened with resignation. She nudged the remaining hardtack with her fingertip. "It's a complicated affair. Got all the time in the world." He settled back against the wall, arms crossed, his focus unwavering. She raised her gaze. "I used to work for Blackwood." Dusty's eyebrow climbed, but he remained silent, urging her forward. "Years ago, before he became the esteemed member of society he is today. He was building his empire, acquiring territory, cutting deals. I was his keeper of accounts, his closest advisor. You saw things," Dusty surmised. "I saw everything. The fixed games, the veiled threats, the blatant payoffs. Blackwood treated the law as a mere suggestion. His only god was influence, his only creed, acquisition." Her voice was hushed, almost inaudible, yet vibrated with smoldering indignation. "And you decided to walk away?" "I confronted him. I told him I refused to be complicit any longer. I threatened exposure." Dusty offered a slow nod. "That wasn't wise." "No," she admitted. "Far from it." He offered a king's ransom for my silence, for my departure. I refused. I believed I could prevail, that the courts would protect me. A bitter laugh escaped her. "I was deluded." "So he arranged a setup," Dusty said, connecting the dots. "The robbery, the bloodshed. He needed me neutralized. Permanently. He knew about the evidence, the documentation that could unravel his whole operation. Framing me was the simplest solution. Turn me into a fugitive, an outlaw, and my words become worthless. Dusty stared into the fire, his mind reeling. Blackwood's rot permeated deeper than he'd suspected. He understood the man's ruthlessness, but this was a different breed of malice. He'd crossed a threshold, and anyone standing in his way was collateral damage, including Tessa. And now, perhaps, himself. "What sort of evidence?" he inquired, his voice low and careful. "Balance sheets, agreements, correspondence, everything that proves his crooked dealings. I concealed them. He's certain of that. It's why he wants me breathing, at least until he unearths them." "Where is it?" Tessa hesitated, her gaze studying his. "I'm not confiding that information just yet." Dusty didn't push. He grasped her apprehension. He was, at his core, still a bounty hunter, however conflicted. "Blackwood is a force to be reckoned with," she continued, her voice solidifying. "He holds sway over the judiciary, the banks, half the county. A direct conflict would be futile. Then what do you propose?" "We expose him. We deliver the evidence to someone beyond his reach. Someone driven to see justice served." "Easier wished than done," Dusty muttered. "I have contacts," Tessa replied, a spark of hope igniting in her eyes. "People who still hold to principles, individuals unbowed by Blackwood's authority. We simply need to reach them." Dusty rose, moving about the confined space. He hunted fugitives, collected his payment, and rode on. But something about Tessa, about her unwavering spirit, about the raw injustice she'd suffered, had begun to stir something within him. Perhaps it was the haunting memory of his own father, wrongfully convicted and executed for a crime he didn't commit. Perhaps it was the desperation he saw mirrored in Tessa's gaze, a silent plea he couldn't dismiss. Or, perhaps, just perhaps, he was weary of walking the shadows. He stopped his restless pacing and looked at her, his gaze intense and resolute. "All right," he stated, his voice firm. "Let's expose him." Tessa's face softened, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time since their paths crossed. "Thank you, Dusty." He turned away, retrieving his rifle. "Don't offer thanks yet. This will be a protracted, brutal fight, and we're riding straight into the thick of it." He stepped out of the cabin, into the invigorating mountain air, the nascent sun painting long, reaching shadows across the valley floor. He knew he was making a choice, a decision with potentially life-altering consequences. He was no longer simply a bounty hunter. He was something altered, something greater. He was a comrade. He was a guardian. He was, undeniably, a fool. But as he glanced back at the cabin, at Tessa framed in the doorway, her gaze alight with burgeoning hope, he realized he wouldn't have it any other way. The secrets of the past had surfaced, and the fight for what lay ahead had commenced. The old lawman, the track to Jed Stone's cabin, was barely a track at all, more a suggestion etched into the unforgiving landscape. Dusty urged the horses onward, the wind a low, mournful whistle through the skeletal branches of pines clinging to the mountainside. Tessa rode behind him, her face obscured by a thick scarf against the biting wind, but he could feel her gaze on his back, a constant reminder of the risk he was now taking. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was a study in weathered resilience. Logs grayed by decades of sun and snow, a roof sagging under the weight of accumulated winters, a single, smoke-stained window peering out like a wary eye, a wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, a fragile flag of habitation in the vast wilderness. Dusty dismounted, the leather of his saddle creaking in protest. He tied the reins to a gnarled juniper bush, its branches twisted into grotesque shapes by the relentless wind. "Stay here," he told Tessa, his voice low. "Let me see if he's receptive." He approached the cabin cautiously, his hand hovering near the butt of his revolver. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and wood smoke, tinged with a faint, almost metallic tang. He knocked, the sound echoing in the stillness. A long silence followed, broken only by the wind's persistent sigh. Just as Dusty was about to knock again, the door creaked open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the dim interior. Jed Stone was a mountain of a man, even in his advanced years. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, each line telling a story of hardship and resilience. His eyes, though faded with age, still held a spark of shrewd intelligence. He wore a worn flannel shirt, its collar unbuttoned, revealing a thick, corded neck. A shotgun was propped casually against the doorframe, a silent warning. "Rivers," he rasped, his voice like gravel grinding against stone. "Didn't expect to see you darken my doorstep, especially not after you took that Blackwood money." Dusty felt a flush of shame creep up his neck. "I need to talk to you, Stone. It's about Blackwood." Stone's eyes narrowed. Blackwood's a viper, best left alone. He started to close the door. "He framed Tessa Langford," Dusty said quickly, stepping forward to block the door. "She has proof that could bring him down." Stone paused, his gaze shifting to Tessa, who had dismounted and was now standing a few feet away. Her chin was raised, her eyes defiant. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured bellows. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "But I ain't promising nothing." The cabin's interior was sparsely furnished. A rough-hewn table, a couple of chairs, a bunk bed in the corner. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, and something else, something vaguely medicinal. Stone gestured to the chairs. "Sit. Talk." Dusty and Tessa sat, facing Stone across the table. Dusty laid it all out, the ambush, the stolen land, Blackwood's ruthlessness, Tessa's evidence. Stone listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Dusty finished, Stone leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Blackwood owns this town, Rivers. He owns the law, the judge, damn near everyone with a pulse. You're tilting at windmills." "Maybe," Dusty conceded. "But Tessa deserves a chance, and someone needs to stop him." "Deserves," Stone scoffed. "Justice ain't got nothing to do with deserving. It's about power. And Blackwood's got all the power." He looked at Tessa. "Why didn't you run? You had the chance." Tessa met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because running would be admitting guilt. I didn't do anything wrong. And I won't let him steal my land, my reputation, my life," Stone grunted. "Stubborn, I'll give you that." He ran a hand over his grizzled beard. "I know things about Blackwood, things he thought were buried, things that could hurt him." "Then help us," Dusty pleaded. "Help us expose him." Stone hesitated, his eyes filled with a deep weariness. "It'll be a war, Rivers. A bloody, ugly war. And you'll be right in the middle of it." "I know," Dusty said, his voice firm. "I'm ready." Stone looked at Tessa again, a flicker of something akin to pity in his eyes. "You sure about this, girl? Once you start down this road, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," Tessa said, her voice unwavering. Stone sighed again, a deeper, more resigned sound this time. He stood up and walked to a dusty shelf, pulling down a tin box. He opened it, revealing a collection of documents, letters, and photographs. "This," he said, his voice low, "is where we start." Blackwood made a lot of enemies on his way to the top. These are their stories, their grievances, their evidence. He turned back to Dusty and Tessa, his eyes now filled with a grim determination. "Blackwood thinks he's untouchable. He thinks he can buy his way out of anything. But he's wrong. There's always a price to pay, and I aim to make sure he pays it." He paused, his gaze hardening. "But listen to me, both of you. This ain't going to be easy. Blackwood will come after you with everything he's got. You understand?" Dusty nodded. "We understand," Tessa added, her voice tight with resolve. "We're ready." Stone studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded curtly. "Oh, right," he said. "Let's get to work. But first," he reached for his shotgun, "we need to talk about strategy. And maybe," he added with a grim smile, "a little bit about survival." Blackwood's web Jed Stone's cabin reeked of aged grievances, a pungent mix of wood smoke and simmering ire. Beneath the weak, yellow glow of a kerosene lamp, he flattened a worn map on a scarred table. "Blackwood bleeds this town dry," he growled, a calloused thumb tracing its faded contours. "He's got his fingers in the water, the lumber, the mercantile, damn near everything but the church." Dusty frowned, squinting. "How'd he pull that off?" "Slow squeeze." Stone's voice was like shale grinding. "Lent money to the desperate, snatched their land when they defaulted, bought low, crushed competition. He's a predator lurking in a carefully spun den." Tessa, her gaze locked on the map, pointed. "And my ranch." Stone tapped Langford Reg. "Choice grazing." Blackwood always had an appetite for it. "The frame-up? Just the quickest way to carve it off the bone." He unearthed a ledger, its pages crammed with meticulous script. "Here's where he buries the rot. Illegal grabs, payoffs to the sheriff, all of it. Can we use this?" Dusty asked, hope edging his tone. Stone's sigh was a dry rustle. "It's a crack in the wall, but Blackwood's got eyes everywhere. Getting this to folks who can act will be like navigating a field of vipers." "We have to," Tessa insisted, resolve hardening her features. Stone conceded with a nod. "There's a chance with someone in town. Maria Rodriguez. Works at the Golden Nugget. She's witnessed things. Overheard conversations." Dusty's gaze sharpened. "Why trust her?" "Blackwood's been tightening the screws on her, too. Her husband died at the mill. Blackwood tossed her a few coins as hush money, barely enough to keep her mouth shut." The Golden Nugget roared with clinking glass, boisterous laughter, and a honky-tonk piano that was perpetually out of tune. The air tasted of flat beer and cheap perfume. A cloying miasma. Dusty and Tessa's entrance hushed the room momentarily, drawing curious stares. Dusty surveyed the scene, locating Maria Rodriguez wiping a table toward the back. A petite woman. Her dark eyes carried a haunted quality. They settled at a table near the bar, ordering whiskey. Dusty observed Maria's cautious movements, the way she seemed to shrink into herself. He caught her eye, offering a discreet Kelbera. Nod. She flinched, her face paling. Minutes later, Maria approached, her hands visibly trembling. "Can I help you, señores?" she asked, her voice a fragile thread. "We need some information," Dusty replied, keeping his tone even. "About Silas Blackwood." Maria's eyes widened in alarm. A swift glance around the room preceded her cautious lean. "I know nothing," she breathed. "Please, leave me out of it. We know about your husband. Maria, Tessa said softly. We know Blackwood swindled you. Tears pricked Maria's eyes. He called it an accident. But Miguel was a capable man, careful in his work. Blackwood's lumber mill grinds up lives for profit. Dusty pressed. He probably pushed your husband into an unsafe situation. Dusty slid a folded bill across the scarred wood. We want to help you, Maria. We want to expose Blackwood's true face. Maria vacillated, her gaze flicking between them. Raw fear warred with something else, a nascent spark of rebellion. He controls everything, she whispered, her voice laced with despair. The sheriff, the judge, they're all his puppets. We know, Tessa affirmed, a steely edge in her voice. But there are others ready to see him face justice. We just need your help to light the fuse. Maria wrung her hands, her face a canvas of inner turmoil. I have a son, she pleaded, her voice cracking. I can't jeopardize him. We understand, Dusty reassured her, his tone gentle. But remember your husband, Maria. Remember all those hurt by Blackwood's avarice. He won't stop unless someone breaks the chain. Maria closed her eyes, drawing a shaky breath. The defiance in her eyes was resolute. What do you want to know? Over the next hour, they extracted details from Maria, piecing together a more complete, damning portrait of Blackwood's network of corruption. She illuminated his contract rigging, official bribery, and ruthless intimidation. She spoke of families ruined, workforces exploited, and a town gasping under Blackwood's oppressive weight. He washes money through the lumber mill, Maria confessed, her voice fading beneath the saloon's din. He ships timber out of state, then falsifies the invoices to dodge taxes. She verified Stone's suspicions about Miguel's demise, explaining that her husband had stumbled upon accounting irregularities shortly before his accident. As they spoke, Dusty noticed a stout man sporting a handlebar mustache watching them from across the room. A deputy sheriff's badge glinted on his vest, and his eyes held a chilling calculation. Dusty gave Tessa a subtle nod towards the deputy. Blackwood's watching, he murmured. Tessa's jaw tightened. We have to thread carefully. They thanked Maria, promising to safeguard her and her son. Stepping out of the Golden Nugget, Dusty felt the tendrils of Blackwood's influence tightening. They were no longer battling solely for Tessa's property. They were fighting for the town's very survival. The night air was bracing. Stars blazed against the velvet sky, a striking contrast to the town's moral murk. Glancing back at the saloon, Dusty saw the deputy sheriff emerge, shadowing them. We're being tailed, he stated grimly. Looks like Blackwood's game has begun. The ranch rayed the air, thick with the cloying sweetness of pine and the metallic tang of approaching rain, clung to Dusty and Tessa as they gained the ridge overlooking Blackwood's domain. Below, the ranch sprawled across the valley, buildings huddled together in the fading light, a deceptive tableau of tranquility. Dusty, however, knew the face Blackwood presented to the world was a carefully constructed lie. Monumental, Tessa breathed, her voice tight with apprehension. Her knuckles shone bone-white as she clenched the reins. He's built a fortress on the ruins of other people's lives. Dusty merely grunted, his gaze a hawk's survey of the property. A tall, rough-hewn fence ringed the core buildings, punctuated by sentry towers where armed men stood watch. The distant baying of patrol dogs drifted up the slope, a mournful chorus. Even from this vantage he could feel the oppressive weight of Blackwood's greed suffocating the land. He's anticipating trouble, Dusty muttered, half to himself. We'll have to tread carefully. The next hour dissolved into a study of the ranch's defenses. patrol patterns, weak points, structural layout. Jed, back in town, was scouring old records for a ranch map, a long shot, considering how drastically Blackwood had reshaped the place. The barn seemed their best bet for finding what they needed: ledgers, correspondence, anything that definitively linked Blackwood to the land theft. "The main gate's a death trap," Tessa observed, tilting her chin towards it. "And those hounds, they'll pick up our scent before we even get close." Dusty conceded the point. "Then we find another entrance. A dry wash snakes along the western perimeter. It might provide some cover." As twilight bled into night, they retraced their steps to their makeshift camp. The image of Blackwood's stronghold burned into their minds. The rain began, a thin, insidious drizzle that penetrated their clothing and chilled them to the marrow. "We ride at midnight," Dusty declared, his voice a low rasp. "That gives us what little time we have." Tessa nodded, determination hardening her features. "The plan?" Dusty traced a crude map in the damp earth. "The creek bed gets us close to the barn. I'll stage a distraction on the south side, draw the heat. You slip inside and find those ledgers." "And if they catch me?" Tessa's eyes locked with his. Dusty hesitated, the ghosts of past failures crowding his thoughts. The risk to her gnawed at him, yet she was undeniably the best choice for the task. "Don't," he said finally, his voice gravelly. "But if it happens, I'll be there to get you out." The hours stretched into an eternity. They double-checked weapons, honed edges, inventoried their meager supplies. Dusty smudged charcoal across their faces, masking their features in the gloom. The rain fell steadily, a somber drumbeat against the canvas. Jed arrived moments before midnight, worry creasing his face. He thrust a worn satchel into Dusty's hands. "Best I could do," he said. "Not a map, but blueprints of the original ranch house. Might give you some insight into the cellars." "Thanks, Jed," Dusty said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You're a true friend." Jed simply grunted, avoiding eye contact. "Just be careful, both of you. Blackwood's not someone you trifle with lightly." As they prepared to depart, Dusty met Tessa's gaze, searching for any flicker of doubt. "Are you certain about this?" Her response was unwavering, her eyes blazing with purpose. "More than I've ever been. This is about more than clearing my name, Dusty. It's about reclaiming what's rightfully ours." He reached out and clasped her hand, his rough fingers closing around hers. "Then let's take it back." Mounting their horses, they vanished into the night, rain slicking their hair and wind lashing at them. Nearing the ranch, Dusty pulled back on the reins. "Remember the plan," he murmured, barely audible above the storm. "I create the storm. Diversion. You find the evidence." Tessa nodded, her face pale but resolute. One last firm squeeze of his hand, then she spurred her horse forward, melting into the shadows. Dusty watched her disappear, a knot of apprehension twisting in his gut. This was a desperate gamble, a strike against Blackwood's heart. They had no other option. He kicked his own horse into motion, heading toward the south end of the ranch, the sound of hooves pounding the soaked earth a defiant challenge. He fired a shot, the sound cracking the stillness, followed by another and another. The gods would be coming soon. He just hoped it would buy Tessa enough time. Urging his horse faster, he rode toward the fence. They needed to focus on him, on the noise, not on the silent wraith stealing towards the barn. Another shot, a raw yell torn from his throat. He was the offering, the bait. He prayed that Tessa would find what they needed before the trap closed. The clamor of men yelling and dogs barking grew closer as he crashed through the fence, riding straight into Blackwood's territory. The hunt was on. Into the lion's den the wind screamed like a tormented spirit, flinging gritty swirls across the desolate plain as Dusty and Tessa gained the crest overlooking Blackwood's stronghold. The ranch, a formidable structure of rough-hewn timbers and fieldstone, radiated a baleful luminescence, the calculated glow of kerosene lamps sculpting elongated, spectral figures that writhed with the turbulent air. This was it, the viper's nest. Ready? Dusty's question was swallowed by the wind's desolate keen. He checked his Winchester, the crisp click of metal a sharp intrusion on the heavy quiet. Tessa's face, etched with determination, met his gaze. The shifting lamplight played across her resolute features. Let's end this. She tightened her grip on the small wrench, her sole weapon beside a quick mind in detailed knowledge of the ranch's secrets. They descended, ghosts, slipping through the inky black, using the scant cover of sagebrush and the deep gullies carved by ages of erosion. The ranch dogs, a rabid pack of mongrels, posed the biggest immediate danger. Dusty carried dried meat, laced with a potent soporific, a cruel offering to the three-headed beast. Dusty moved with ingrained expertise, years spent reading the land and forming every step. Tessa, however, proved surprisingly adept. A quiet capability marked her movements, a familiarity with the harsh terrain that contradicted her citified background. She moved with assurance, placing her feet with certainty even in the deepest shadows. They reached the perimeter fence, a daunting barrier of stout posts and tightly wound barbs. Dusty produced wire cutters, the sharp snip sound that seemed amplified in the vast silence. He carefully created an opening, just wide enough, then resecured the wire to prevent betraying rattles. Inside, the tension spiked. They were on Blackwood's turf now, each rustle, each twig snap, a potential siren. They skirted the main house, its windows emitting a sickly warmth. The low drone of voices carried faintly. "The barn," Tessa breathed, indicating the hulking shape in the distance. "He keeps the ledgers there, but there's a new alarm. Blackwood installed it last month." Dusty cursed silently. Jed had said nothing. "What kind?" "Pressure sensors," Tessa explained, urgency tightening her voice. "Hidden under loose floorboards in his office. Step on one, and it trips a bell in the bunkhouse." "Can you disarm it?" She hesitated. "I used to help my father with the ranch electrics. I know the principles, but this is new. I don't know how sophisticated it is." "We've got no choice," Dusty said, his gaze sweeping the gloom. "We can't risk alerting everyone." They reached the barn, a cathedral of hay, horses, and the acrid tang of manure. The main entrance was watched by two men, faces obscured by hat brims. Dusty signaled Tessa to stay put, then drifted forward, becoming one with the shadows. He approached the sentries from behind, moving with silent precision. A swift application of pressure, a stifled grunt, and the first guard crumpled. The second, alerted by the disturbance, spun around, hand reaching for iron. But Dusty was faster. A sharp kick, followed by a crushing impact, silenced him for good. Dusty dragged the bodies into the shadows, concealing them behind stacked bales. "All clear," he breathed, beckoning Tessa forward. Inside, the air hung thick with dust and the sharp reek of livestock. The office was at the far end, a cramped space that smelled of stale cigars and rot-gut whiskey. Tessa moved with purpose now, eyes sweeping the floor for any telltale sign. "They'll be under the loose planks," she murmured, fingers tracing the lines. "He wouldn't want them obvious." She located the first plate near the doorway, a small disc barely visible beneath accumulated grime. "Damn," she breathed. More elaborate than I figured. He's wired them to a central junction box. Where? Dusty asked, hand near his revolver. In the corner, behind the desk. Tessa indicated a metal box mounted on the wall, wires snaking across the floor like vipers. She approached cautiously, wrench in hand. "Give me a few minutes," she said, focus sharpening her features. "Keep watch." Dusty stood guard, his gaze sweeping the interior. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by creaking timbers and the distant howl. Tessa worked efficiently, fingers dancing over the wires. She identified the main power, a thick red cable running directly to the bell. "Almost," she breathed, brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, a horse whinnied, ears twitching nervously. Dusty tensed, hand tightening on his weapon. He scanned the shadows, seeking the source of the disturbance. A figure emerged, a hulking man with a shotgun held casually. One of Blackwood's enforcers, Hank the gunslinger. "Well, well," Hank drawled, voice dripping with menace. "Looks like we got company. Blackwood wants a word." Dusty stepped forward, eyes locked on Hank's. "Just passing through," he said, voice steady. "I don't think so," Hank sneered. He raised the shotgun, leveling it at Dusty's chest. "Come quiet, or I'll make you." Tessa, hearing the commotion, risked a peek. Her eyes widened as she saw the shotgun trained on Dusty. Without pause, she grabbed a heavy inkwell and hurled it with all her strength. The inkwell connected with Hank's temple, sending him staggering. He stumbled, the shotgun blasting harmlessly into the hayloft. Dusty seized the moment, lunging forward and tackling Hank. A brutal struggle followed, each man fighting for control of the weapon. Tessa, realizing the stakes, grabbed a pitchfork and charged. She drove the times into Hank's back. He roared, grip failing. Dusty wrested the shotgun away and brought it down on his head, silencing him. They stood, panting, adrenaline coursing through them. The silence returned, broken only by Hank's shallow breaths. "You okay?" Dusty asked, searching her face. "I'm fine," she said, voice trembling slightly. "We need to move. More are coming." She returned to the junction box, working frantically. "Got it," she exclaimed, severing the power cable with a satisfying snap. "The alarm is down." They moved swiftly, searching for the ledgers. They were hidden in a locked safe, behind a portrait of Blackwood. Tessa knew the combination, a sequence based on her father's birthday. She spun the dial, fingers trembling. The safe clicked open, revealing the leather-bound books. "We have them," she breathed, eyes gleaming. But their triumph was fleeting. As they turned, they heard approaching footsteps, the distinctive jingle of spurs on wood. Blackwood's men were coming, closing in. They were trapped, deep in enemy territory. Evidence found, truth revealed. Dusty spat a curse, the study door feeling miles away. Blackwood's thugs gained ground, their bellows reverberating through the sprawling ranch. A swift glance confirmed Tessa close behind, her expression set, the satchel of ledgers of eyes in her grip. "This way," he rasped, angling into a parlor. Sumptuous velvet clashed with ostentatious chandeliers, a bizarre contrast to the harsh reality outside. He desperately sought an escape, a window, anything. "Nowhere to go," Tessa observed dryly, already dissecting the room. "Unless you're partial to a chimney sweep." Ignoring her barb, Dusty sharpened his focus. The heavy tread of Blackwood's men drew nearer. "There," he announced, spotting a hidden door concealed by a massive tapestry. With a yank, he revealed a dim, musty corridor. Hopefully, This offers better prospects than a cellar. They squeezed through the portal, the air instantly chilling. The cramped passage barely allowed them to walk abreast, and darkness pressed in like a shroud. Dusty sparked a match, cupping the fragile flame. It illuminated a long, twisting tunnel of roughly hewn stone. "This place is ancient," Tessa breathed, her voice bouncing off the walls. "This ranch must sit atop something." A shout from behind cut her short. "They're in the east wing. Secure it." Dusty extinguished the match, plunging them into the abyss. "Move," he commanded, seizing Tessa's hand and pulling her onward. They surged down the corridor, their footfalls echoing in the gloom. The tunnel snaked and turned, leading them deeper into the ranch's underbelly. At last, they reached a sturdy wooden door. Dusty wrenched it open, revealing a cavernous, dusty storage room packed with crates and barrels. "Just a sec," Tessa gasped, leaning against a crate to recover her breath. "I think we lost them for the moment." Dusty nodded, his lungs screaming. He moved to the center, extracting the ledgers. He rapidly scanned the pages, his eyes darting over columns of figures and names. "This is it," he murmured, his voice laced with gravity. "Everything we need. Proof of the land grabs, the bribes, the murders Blackwood's entire edifice of deceit laid bare." Tessa drew closer, peering over his shoulder. "Certain? Can you make sense of it all?" "Absolutely," Dusty confirmed, his tone hardening. "I might be a bounty hunter, but I can decipher numbers with the best of them. These records are lethal. Names, dates, sumsits all here." A sudden, splintering crash from the corridor obliterated the silence. "They've found us!" Tessa cried, her eyes widening in alarm. Dusty snapped the ledgers shut, shoving them back into the satchel. "We have to get out of here. Now!" But it was too late. The door exploded inward, and Silas Blackwood stalked into the room, followed by a dozen armed men. Blackwood's face was a storm cloud, his eyes blazing with animosity. "Well, well, well," Blackwood drawled, his voice dripping with malice. "The bounty hunter and the pilferer. I confess, Rivers, I'm disappointed. I believed you possessed principles, that you understood loyalty's worth, but you're just a Kior." Dusty stood his ground, his hand instinctively edging toward his weapon. "My loyalty lies with truth, Blackwood, and the truth is, you're a charlatan and a killer." Blackwood released a harsh, grating laugh that resonated through the room. "Truth? You presume to know truth? You're a simpleton, Rivers. Truth is what I decree. And presently, I decree that you and Miss Langford are trespassing and will be dealt with accordingly." "This isn't yours, Blackwood," Tessa retorted, her voice ringing with defiance. "It was swindled from my family, stolen by treachery and lies. And we have the evidence to expose you." She brandished the satchel, holding it aloft like a standard. "These ledgers will reveal your true self." Blackwood's eyes narrowed, fixed on the satchel. "Those ledgers are falsehoods, concocted by a desperate woman clutching at straws. And you, Rivers, are a fool for believing her." "They're not falsehoods," Dusty growled, his grip tightening on his revolver's handle. "They're the unvarnished truth, and I intend to ensure everyone knows it." "You imagine you can impede me?" Blackwood scoffed, gesturing towards his men. "You and what legion? You're outnumbered, Rivers. Outgunned. This is your terminus." "Perhaps," Dusty replied, his voice steady despite the palpable tension. "But I won't fall without a fight. And I'm taking you with me." He met Tessa's gaze, his eyes reflecting a blend of resolve and a something unexpected, something that surprised even him. "Get ready," he murmured. "This is about to become complicated." Blackwood smirked. I wouldn't prefer it any other way. He nodded to his men. Take them. Pandemonium erupted. Blackwood's men lunged forward, weapons raised. Dusty drew his revolver, the familiar cold steel a welcome sensation. He fired, the shot echoing as one of Blackwood's men collapsed. Tessa dove behind a stack of crates, extracting a small pistol from her boot. The battle had begun. Just as served, Blackwood's laughter echoed in the confined tunnel, a sound that scraped against Dusty's nerves like nails on a chalkboard. He shoved Tessa behind him, his gun raised, the barrel wavering slightly. You ain't getting away with this, Blackwood. Blackwood sneered, his eyes glinting in the dim light cast by a flickering lantern. Brave words from a dead man, Rivers. You think you can stand against me? I own this town, this land, everything. He gestured to his men, who leveled their rifles. Finish them. The first shot rang out, and Dusty flinched, feeling the wind of the bullet as it passed his ear. He returned fire, hitting one of Blackwood's men in the shoulder, the man yelping and stumbling backward. More shots followed, and Dusty pulled Tessa further into the tunnel, seeking any scrap of cover. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the roar of gunfire deafening in the cramped space. He felt a searing pain in his side, a bullet tearing through his flesh. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the pain as best he could. He couldn't let Tessa get hurt. He wouldn't. Dusty, Tessa cried, her voice laced with fear. You're hit. I'm fine, he lied, his voice strained. He knew he wasn't fine, but he couldn't afford to show weakness. He had to protect her. Another volley of shots slammed into the tunnel wall, showering them with dust and debris. Dusty returned fire, taking down another of Blackwood's men. He was running out of bullets, and they were running out of time. Suddenly, a new sound erupted from outside the tunnel entrance, the unmistakable crackle of gunfire, but this time, it wasn't coming from Blackwood's men. A chorus of shouts and screams followed, accompanied by the thunder of horses' hooves. Blackwood's face contorted in fury. What in damnation? Dusty risked a glance outside, and his heart leaped with hope. Jed Stone, astride his trusty steed, led a small posse of townsfolk, guns blazing. Maria Rodriguez was among them, her face grim but determined, a shotgun clutched in her hands. They were engaging Blackwood's men, drawing their fire away from the tunnel entrance. Looks like you ain't as popular as you thought, Blackwood, Dusty said, a grin spreading across his face despite the pain in his side. Blackwood smiled, his eyes darting back and forth, calculating his options. He barked orders at his remaining men, who hesitated, their loyalty wavering in the face of the unexpected resistance. The tide had turned. Jed's voice boomed across the ranch. Blackwood, you're finished. Surrender now, and maybe, just maybe, you'll live to see a jail cell. Blackwood ignored him, his gaze fixed on Dusty and Tessa. This isn't over, Rivers. Langford, this ain't over. He shoved his way through his remaining men and scrambled to his horse, attempting to escape in the chaos. But Jed was too quick. He spurred his horse forward, cutting Blackwood off, his rifle raised. Not so fast, Silas. Your reckoning has come. Blackwood fired, but Jed ducked, the bullet whizzing past his head. He returned fire, hitting Blackwood's horse, which reared up and threw him to the ground. Before Blackwood could regain his footing, Jed was on him, disarming him and pinning him to the dirt. The remaining Blackwood's men, seeing their leader defeated, threw down their weapons. The fight was over. Dusty, using the wall for support, limped out of the tunnel, Tessa close behind him. He watched as Jed hauled Blackwood to his feet, his face a mask of fury. You're under arrest, Silas Blackwood, Jed said, his voice cold and hard. For land fraud, murder, and a whole host of other crimes. He nodded to Maria and a few other townsfolk who stepped forward to take custody of Blackwood's men. Tessa stepped forward, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "You stole my land, Blackwood. You framed me for murder. You ruined my life." Blackwood spat at her feet. "You'll never prove anything." Jed silenced him with a sharp jab to the gut. "We have the ledgers, Blackwood. Rivers and Ms. Langford risked their lives to get them. Your days of preying on this town are over." As Jed and the others led Blackwood away, Dusty leaned heavily against the tunnel wall, his side throbbing with pain. Tessa knelt beside him, her eyes filled with concern. "Dusty, you're hurt badly. We need to get you to a doctor." He managed a weak smile. "I'll be all right. We did it, Tessa. We stopped him." Maria approached them, her face etched with gratitude. "Thank you, Dusty. Thank you, Tessa. You saved us all." "We just did what was right," Dusty said, his voice hoarse. Jed returned, his expression softening slightly. "You both showed a lot of courage. More than I thought anyone in this town had left." He clapped Dusty on the shoulder, wincing at the touch. "Let's get you patched up, Rivers. You've earned it." As they walked toward the ranch house, leaving Blackwood's reign of terror behind them, Dusty knew that his life had changed forever. He had come to this town a bounty hunter, driven by greed and a thirst for reward. But he was leaving a different man, a man who had found something more important than money: justice, redemption, and maybe, just maybe, love. He glanced at Tessa, her face illuminated by the setting sun, and knew that he would do it all again, just to see her smile. A new horizon, the courtroom, usually a mausoleum of legal proceedings, thrummed with hushed anticipation. Golden light poured from the high windows, illuminating swirling particles, a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom of Tessa's trial. Today, a different current ran through the air. Fragile, nascent hope. Tessa stood erect, her gaze steady, as Judge Mallory delivered the judgment. Each syllable resonated in the sudden quiet, striking down the fabrications that had confined her. "This court, after revealing the evidence and hearing the confession of Silas Blackwood, declares Tessa Langford not guilty on all counts." A wave of whispers surged through the gallery. Relief crashed over Tessa, nearly buckling her. At the back, Dusty felt a long-dormant tension unwind in his chest. He watched as a tender smile graced Tessa's face, free from the shadows of fear, a sight he knew he would treasure. The crowd erupted in cheers, a chorus of joy and vindication. Jedediah, his face alight, pressed through to embrace Tessa. Other townsfolk followed, offering solace and congratulations. Dusty stayed put, content to observe. He didn't yet belong amidst the revelry. As twilight approached, bleeding orange and violet across the firmament, Dusty found Tessa seated on the porch of the Langford homestead, returned to its rightful owner. The air was crisp, carrying the aroma of pine and damp earth. "They've offered me my old post back at the schoolhouse," Tessa murmured, her voice soft, almost uncertain. She gazed out at the fields, her thoughts elsewhere. Claimed they were mistaken. Dusty leaned against a pillar, arms crossed. An understatement, if ever there was one. A low chuckle escaped Tessa. "Indeed. Still, I can't return." "Not yet. The memories are too fresh." "I understand." Dusty straightened, joining her in watching the vista before them. The land unfolded towards the mountains, a boundless canvas of freedom. Silence descended, broken only by the cricket's serenade and the distant cry of a coyote. At last, Tessa spoke, barely audible. Thank you, Dusty. Without turning, he replied, Just doing my job. The words rang hollow in his own ears. No, Tessa countered, her voice gaining strength. You exceeded your duty. You risked everything. You didn't have to. Dusty turned, meeting her gaze. He flinched at the warmth within her eyes, a warmth he felt unworthy of. I owed you. Owed me? Her brow arched. For what? For showing me a different perspective. He struggled for articulation, seeking words that wouldn't reveal his inner struggle. For proving there's more to life than chasing rewards. A knowing smile played on Tessa's lips. You're a good man, Dusty Rivers, underneath it all. He snorted derisively. Don't be so sure. He carried the knowledge of the darkness within, the choices etched upon his soul. Escape from his past felt like an impossible dream. I am, Tessa insisted. I've witnessed it. Dusty averted his gaze, unable to hold her understanding. A confession pressed in his throat. Before your case, I was indifferent to who I apprehended. Gender, age irrelevant. The prize was all that mattered. He paused, his voice constricted. I've done things I regret. Tessa reached out, her touch gentle on his forearm. We all carry burdens from yesterday, Dusty. It's our present actions that define us. His eyes focused on her hand, her touch searing his skin. Lifting his gaze, he searched her face for judgment, for condemnation. Instead, he found only empathy. What will you do now? He asked, his voice rough. Tessa shrugged. Rebuild the ranch, I suppose. Begin anew. And you? She countered, turning the question. What about you? Dusty stared at the horizon, his thoughts swirling. Returning to his old existence, the solitary path of a bounty hunter now held only emptiness. He looked back at Tessa, at the hope in her eyes, the resilience in her posture. A sudden certainty washed over him he couldn't abandon her. I'm not sure, he admitted. Perhaps, I'll stay. Tessa's smile broadened, a radiant bloom. I would like that. He cleared his throat, an unfamiliar awkwardness creeping in. There's something else. Her expression shifted, becoming serious. What is it? Dusty inhaled deeply. The money, the bounty. I don't want it. Tessa frowned. But you earned it. You risked your life. It's tainted, Tessa. I won't accept it. Images of lives bartered for coin flashed through his mind. He craved transformation. Donate it to the church, the school, wherever you deem fit. Tessa scrutinized him, peering into the depths of his soul. Finally she nodded. I will. Dawn painted the sky in brilliant hues as Dusty and Tessa stood by their horses, packed for departure. They had shed the excess, leaving behind the lingering echoes of pain and shadows. Where are we headed? Tessa asked, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. A genuine smile illuminated Dusty's face. Wherever the road may lead. He swung into the saddle, extending his hand to Tessa. Her grip was firm, unwavering. He pulled her up, and together they steered their horses westward, towards the setting sun, towards a new chapter. As they left the town behind, Dusty cast one last glance. He saw the grateful faces of those they had aided, those who had placed their faith in them. He saw Jedediah waving farewell. Turning back to the open road, a feeling of tranquility settled over him. The future remained veiled, but he knew he wouldn't face it alone. He had Tessa by his side that was old at Matted. He was no longer merely a bounty hunter. He had become something more, something better. Dusty stole a glance at Tessa. Her face glowed, hope illuminating her eyes. He knew she was leaving a wounded past behind, yet she possessed the fortitude to navigate whatever trials lay ahead, and he would be there to meet them with her. The sun continued its descent, casting elongated shadows across the expanse. A gentle breeze carried the aroma of sagebrush and wildflowers. Side by side, Dusty and Tessa rode onward, the rhythmic cadence of their horses' hooves marking their passage. Their silence was a tapestry woven with understanding, trust, and burgeoning affection. They were leaving behind the old dusty rivers, the man motivated by greed and vengeance. They were riding towards a new existence, an existence imbued with purpose, meaning, and optimism. Together, they rode towards a new horizon.